Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, The Benefits of Referring Elder Abuse Clients for Civil Legal Assistance, being brought to you today by the Elder Justice Initiative and the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center. As with all technology, we may at some point experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. In the event of a problem, please be patient, remain with us. The webinar should resume shortly. We do want to take a moment here at the beginning to make sure that everyone is properly connected and you can hear us or see the closed captioning and everything's working properly for you. So if you do have an issue, please feel free to send our technical specialist, Kayla, a private chat message. The chat feature is found on the lower right part of your screen. You can also use the chat throughout the webinar to send in questions for our presenters to field at the end of the webinar today. If you cannot access the chat and would like to communicate with us, you can send Kayla an email at khough@ovcttac.org. We'd like to note that we do record the EJI webinar series, so today's session is being recorded. We make those recordings available on the OVC-TTAC training website and also the Elder Justice Initiative website for viewing later or by your colleagues who couldn't join us. So we encourage you to share that once those become available. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our host, Yolanda Campbell, who's a trial attorney at the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative. Yolanda.
Thank you, Lori. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. As many of you hopefully already know, the Elder Justice Initiative supports and coordinates the Department of Justice's enforcement and programmatic efforts to combat elder abuse, neglect, and financial fraud and scams that target older adults. And as part of this effort, we have been hosting a series of webinars. Today's webinar is intended to provide you with information on how and whom to make referrals for civil legal assistance and the numerous ways in which civil legal assistance can aid older victims. And we are very fortunate to have two great speakers with us today, Bill Benson and Jennifer Goldberg. Our first speaker, Bill Benson, is the Managing Principal of Health Benefits, ABCs. He has worked in the aging field for more than 4 decades at the local, state, and national levels, including as state LTC ombudsman, senior congressional staffer, political appointee at US HHS, and as NAPSA's national policy advisor since the late 90s. Our second speaker today is Jennifer Goldberg. Jennifer serves as directing attorney at Justice and Aging, where she provides leadership for the National Center on Law and Elder Rights, and develops and implements initiatives that improve access to health care and long-term services and supports for low-income older Americans. Prior to joining Justice and Aging and NCLER, Jennifer spent 14 years at Maryland Legal Aid, most recently as Director of Advocacy for Elder Law and Health Care. I'm going to turn it now over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Yolanda, for the introduction, and particularly thank you for hosting this webinar. I want to express our appreciation at the National Adult Protective Services Association to the Elder Justice Initiative at OVC for hosting this. I also want to thank the Administration for Community Living for their support for this effort. And I know Hillary Dolan is on the line from ACL. I am the managing principal of Health Benefits ABCs, but I'm wearing my hat as the National Policy Advisor to the National Adult Protective Services Association. And I want to say just a little bit for a moment, if I could, about APS. And I'm going to move the slide here. NAPSA, the National Adult Protective Services Association, was founded in 1989 to serve as a national association, the only national association for adult protective services professionals, and those run the gamut from state APS administrators to county administrators to frontline workers and investigators. The principal role of NAPSA is to strengthen adult protective services nationwide through education, research, and advocacy. I also want to mention that NAPSA is the home to the National Institute on Elder Financial Exploitation, which was created several years ago. NAPSA hosts an annual conference. It's the only national conference that takes place with respect to elder abuse, bringing together not just folks from adult protective services, but from all disciplines with an interest in this topic. And we always conclude our conference with a one-day summit sponsored by NEFI with respect to financial exploitation. A bit about Adult Protective Services, and I'm guessing there are a fair number of folks on the line who are familiar with APS, but it's worth mentioning that they are probably familiar with APS in their own states. And I think that's an important point here because there's a lot of variation from state to state. However, in most states, Adult Protective Services serve those age 60 and over, as well as adults ages 18 to 59 with a disability as defined under state law. In all states, APS investigates complaints that come from the community. In about half the states, APS is authorized to investigate complaints that come out of long-term care facilities, nursing homes, and assisted living facilities. Some APS agencies are state-administered. The majority are, in fact, and then some states have a county-administered system, and some actually, like North Carolina, it's a shared responsibility. APS essentially serves as the social services response to elder abuse. APS receives abuse reports and attempts to remedy or reduce the abuse to help move along cases that need to go to referral to others like law enforcement or civil litigators, and to protect the victim as much as possible and to enable them to the extent possible to remain independent in their home and in their community. And APS works closely with law enforcement, criminal justice, area agencies on aging, and many others. The reason I'm on this panel, this webinar today, is that we partnered, we being NAPSA, along with the other organization I'm with, the Health Benefits ABCs, and California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform, or CANNER, in San Francisco, California, on a project to try to educate adult protective service workers about the role of civil law, what civil litigators can do, particularly with respect to financial exploitation cases. That was really the emphasis of our work, and I'll elaborate on that in the next few minutes. And we had essentially a threshold question. What does Adult Protective Services do when it encounters or suspects that financial abuse has occurred? Do they contact law enforcement? And if they do, then what? And then the second is, do they suggest a civil attorney to address the matter? And if they do, then what? To get us started with this joint initiative with CANNER, we conducted 2 surveys. We did a survey of adult protective services in California, and California is a county-administered system, so each county runs their own adult protective services program. So we surveyed all of the county APS programs in California. We essentially were asking them what their practices are, what their experience is with referrals and use of the civil litigation process on financial exploitation cases. Of California's 58 counties, 24 responded. The average number of reports from those 24 counties received in total across the spectrum of the types of complaints reports they get was almost 4,500, 4,448. And of those, the average number of reports that alleged financial abuse or exploitation, it was in the vicinity of about 1/3, 1,570. What we found through the survey is that case outcomes, what happened as a result of their work to the extent they knew, were more likely to result in financial consequences for the perpetrator, penalties of one kind or another, than in restitution for the victim or criminal consequences for the perpetrator. Getting a little bit more into the California survey, referrals that were made in reports alleging financial exploitation, we found that the programs were most likely, the most common referral they would make would be to law enforcement. The least likely place they would make a referral to would be a civil attorney, particularly to the civil bar. Now, I want to make a distinction that I know will come up here a little bit later. We did find that APS quite frequently makes referrals to legal services programs, publicly funded legal services programs or legal aid programs, particularly those that serve older people, but in general, they do make a fair number of referrals. But in terms of the private bar itself, we found they did not make many referrals to civil attorneys, and I'll get into a bit more about that. We found in California that they simply did not know how many cases that were referred to civil attorneys had a successful outcome. They just essentially were not tracking that information. 40% reported being neither satisfied nor dissatisfied with the handling of financial abuse cases. They just didn't know. But 40% said they were somewhat satisfied. We didn't drill down to find out what exactly that meant. Was it they were satisfied just because they made the referral, or did they in fact know that it had a good outcome? With respect to being trained on civil law, from the basics like, what can a civil attorney do for a victim of financial exploitation? What does restitution mean? How would you get restitution? What laws in the state will support that? 21% in California said their APS programs provide training on civil law and restitution, which we were encouraged by that, but almost 80% do not. But 91% of APS programs in California indicated their interest in having such a training. In addition to our survey of California APS, we did a national survey of all states' APS programs along the same lines, sending the survey to the state administrators in each of the states. 24 states, almost half of the states reported as well as responded, as well as Guam. In nationwide, the average number of reports received were about 11,413, and the average number of reports alleging financial exploitation were about 1,600. So the percentage of reports alleging financial exploitation nationwide were much smaller compared to the overall reports than we found in California. Again, case outcome data was unavailable for more than 80% of responses with respect to was there restitution, what were the financial consequences for the perpetrator, and what were the criminal consequences for the perpetrator. They just didn't know. Essentially, most programs report not following a case beyond their own system. So when it's handed off elsewhere, not really knowing what the outcome of that is. Now, I will do as an aside here, since we did this survey, thanks to ACL, the Administration of Community Living, we now have a national adult maltreatment reporting system, NAMERS, that is in place that we hope will begin to provide us much more insight into all of this. Back to the national survey, referrals and reports alleging financial exploitation were most likely, again, just like in California, to be made to law enforcement. They were least likely to refer to a State Bar Association's lawyer referral service, but again, nationwide, there were a fair number of reports that were made to legal aid. Again, they did not know how many cases were referred to civil attorneys, whether or not they were successful. 55% were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, which suggests nationally they know less about what happens to cases that are referred to civil attorneys, with 22.2% saying they were somewhat satisfied with the results. With training, very similar results. 30% said, and this is nationwide, said their APS program provides training on civil law and restitution, and 86% of states' APS programs were interested in receiving such training. So let me move to the next phase of this initiative and do this as quickly as I can. The next stage for us was to begin to, on a pilot basis, train adult protective service workers and others on civil law, what the possibilities are, why you would want to do that. And we thought this training was particularly important in California because that's both where California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform works, but it's also where we found that, as our survey results showed, that there were actually a number of counties that had informal policies in place not to refer to civil attorneys, and one county had a county-based policy that was explicit in saying you may not refer to civil attorneys. Whatever reasons are behind that, we can only speculate, but that was formal policy in this one particular county. So we trained, we did a total of 4 training programs in Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And the idea was to expose them to actual cases as well as some hypothetical cases involving, for the most part, significant loss of money due to predatory practices, such as those associated with reverse mortgages, selling of annuities, other fairly high-end financial forms of financial exploitation. And we wanted to, in the training, say, so, if you hand it off to law enforcement, what happens? And the conclusion pretty much is, for the most part, it goes nowhere. But if, in fact, it does go to law enforcement and the police investigate, it goes to the attorney, the district attorney, and he prosecutes, and the person even ends up in jail. Our point was primarily that the victim is never made whole in any way or even in part. They don't get their money back. The perpetrator might in fact even end up in prison in some few cases, but the victim doesn't get their money back. But if you follow the civil law route, you may have the opportunity to be able to get restitution for the people that you serve. I'm not going to go into more detail on the training at this point, but to say that reviews were positive, with both saying that training would make a difference in their work in terms of their willingness to make referrals to the civil bar, their understanding of why that makes a difference and why it would actually help their clients. I would say, as an aside, there's a tremendous need with adult protective services, long-term care ombudsmen, and others in the service providing business to understand what civil law represents, what it can do, the distinction between legal aid and litigators. We even talked a good deal about small claims court, the use of mediation, all varieties of civil law. We found that in our training that in 2 of our trainings, more than where we did the evaluation, we didn't do one in the 4th one. In 2 of the 3 trainings, more than half the evaluators were unfamiliar with the legal referral service that is available in California for this purpose. So it was an unknown landscape for a lot of these folks. So I think I'm going to stop now. I've used my allotted time. I'll be available to ask questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing Jennifer Goldberg, to whom I'm passing off the baton now.
Okay, thank you, Bill. This is Yolanda Campbell again. I think we have one poll question we're going to use as a transition right now for everyone. So you guys, if everyone who's listening can just answer the question on the poll in front of you, and then we'll give it a couple minutes.
Okay, go ahead and answer the question now.
All right, so it looks like a lot of people are, I'm having a hard time. Is it other legal? Or from other legal? No, victim services.
It looks to me like we have a lot of people with victim services, maybe about 1/3 of the folks who are coming in are doing that, and a significant number of folks who have a legal aid background and an APS background, as well as a social work background, and other legal. We've got a nice broad range of participants, which is exactly what we were aiming for on this webinar, so I'm so pleased to see that.
Great. Okay, so Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and share with everyone what you've prepared today?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this webinar. I want to thank the Department of Justice and their Elder Justice Initiative for doing this training, and the National Center on Law and Elder Rights really appreciates the opportunity to participate today, and so I'm particularly pleased to join in this discussion. I wanted to start off just making sure that everybody knows what the National Center on Law and Elder Rights is. We're abbreviated NCLR, so there's lots of shorthand out there in the world. If you hear me saying NCLR, I mean the National Center on Law and Elder Rights, and we're relatively new. We've been going for about 1.5 years now, and we provide the legal services and aging and disability communities with the resources that they need. We're really designed to serve as a one-stop shop. We do training, case consultations, and technical assistance, and those are all designed to help those who are serving older adults with the greatest social and economic needs understand what the legal rights of those older adults are and what types of remedies may be available to them and how they can access those remedies. So I work with Justice in Aging, and Justice in Aging administers NCLR through a contract with the Administration for Community Living and the Administration on Aging in particular as part of ACL. So that's who we are, and I hope that some of you
may have used our trainings before. I'll talk a little bit more about them at the end of my section. So as I was listening to Bill's initial presentation today, it strikes me that a real threshold question here is why would anyone who is providing a referral, including adult protective services, but really a whole range of different partners in the aging community, in law enforcement, all different areas of services where people may say what the person that I am trying to help right now needs may be civil legal assistance. So what is it that civil legal assistance can provide? One thing is that civil legal assistance provides unique interventions compared to other types of services that could be provided, unique opportunities to help restore victims and mitigate risk for future financial exploitation in particular. When older adults receive civil legal assistance, they are in the driver's seat. They are the client, and their goals and wishes are really paramount. This is different from the criminal system where the older adult is the witness, not the client. So civil legal assistance also can provide remedies that aren't available in the same way through other mechanisms. So on this slide, I have a number of those possible remedies. Some of them include a protective order, ordering the perpetrator to stay away from the victim, for example, evicting a perpetrator from the victim's home. You can potentially get freezing of bank accounts if someone is subject to financial exploitation and their bank account is being drained. You can, if someone is abusing a power of attorney, and that is the form of abuse that's taking place, then a civil legal attorney can help revoke that power of attorney to end its power or change the person so that they can put another person in charge of helping them with their finances. If someone is under guardianship, a civil attorney can help terminate that guardianship if that guardianship is the source of the abuse, or if there's some type of contract, a scam that someone has gotten themselves into and they've been taken advantage of, a civil lawyer can help rescind that contract, take it back, stop it, and try to get the person's money back as some form of restitution. So those are all a myriad of different things, and that's just the beginning of the different types of civil remedies that a civil attorney can provide that are quite different than what's provided on the criminal side or through other social services. Now, as Bill mentioned, there are a variety of different ways that people can access civil legal assistance. So one way is through civil legal aid, through legal aid attorneys who are primarily helping individuals who have financial need. So some different types of civil legal aid, they have a variety of different funding sources. Sometimes they're funded through Legal Services Corporation, federally funded that way. Other times they're funded on a state basis through Title 3B of the Older Americans Act, and that's a really critical source because that part of the Older Americans Act focuses legal services on older Americans with the greatest social and economic need. And then sometimes some legal aid offices are funded privately through foundations or other private donors as well. Each of those different types of civil legal aid providers have different criteria for them to be able to help someone. So for example, for people who are funded through the Legal Services Corporation, they have income and asset requirements of only being able to help people who have low income and limited resources. For Title 3B providers, for attorneys who are funded in that way, then There is not an income or an asset test, but they do focus their work on older Americans with the greatest social and economic need, as I said. And all of these civil legal aid attorneys have specific priorities that are specific to their office. And Title IIIB attorneys, one of their priorities is elder abuse and exploitation, and that's a priority under the Older Americans Act. And so it's an area that where attorneys would be particularly interested in receiving referrals. In addition to civil legal aid, a referral may also be appropriate to the private bar, which is what Bill was starting to talk about. The private bar attorneys may include people who are solo practitioners, who are just hang up a shingle in their office by themselves. It could include a small firm or a large law firm, a range of different types of attorneys there. And that referral may be particularly relevant where someone is seeking some type of civil money damages, because often civil legal aid is less likely to be able to take those cases. And depending on the area where you are, there may be specialists who work specifically on elder law issues and with older adults as their clients. And so I recommend that you contact your local or state bar association to see whether there are specific an elder law section or a specific set of attorneys who work on these types of issues who have identified themselves. Lastly, I wanted to mention referral services that may be available, such as lawyer referral services through a bar association or other county levels where you can refer to a particular phone number, and then they have a set of attorneys who've agreed to do some screening and take cases in that way. And those referral services can be a great option for referrals because you're not then pointing to any particular attorney. You're just suggesting a way that they can access a range of different attorneys. So when we're talking about referrals, there are a number of considerations that people really need to think through. And the first one of them that I want to talk about is client consent. And that's really critical because often when I'm talking to people who are thinking about how do they share information or get new information from their client, they're reluctant to involve other professionals because of their duty of confidentiality. And certainly as an attorney, and I think, and I understand that for many of the professionals, that confidentiality that you establish with your client is paramount. And so while we want to make sure that we're respecting that confidentiality, we also need to make sure how can you get through that in order to get your client all the different services they may need, including services that may not be provided by your organization. And the first way to do that is just to make sure that you have client consent. Because in most situations, as long as you have the consent of the client to share information, you can provide information directly to another professional to seek assistance for them. So that in addition to telling the client you may want to contact legal aid, you can also do more of a warm handoff and really make sure that you know where the person is going to. And as I said, in terms of professional obligations, attorneys have very strict client confidentiality rules, and so do many of the other professionals that are on this call today. And everybody has slightly different professional obligations. So understanding what those different professional obligations are and making sure that you find a way to work through them so that you can still refer to someone and get someone the civil legal help that they need is critical. And from my perspective, the best way to do that is by establishing relationships. Because when you have established a relationship with another agency, another professional, another service, then you will be better able to understand how does it work when I refer someone to you? What happens next in your process? What will you be able to tell me? Will you be able to tell me the outcome? Usually for an attorney, once you've referred to them, they're not going to be able to share information that the client then tells them unless they get client consent and there's an explicit agreement to do so. So establishing what the parameters of those relationships are and how you can most productively work together is really important. And that means, among other things, really getting to know who is available in your community. Because, you know, we're having a national conversation right now, and so understanding what different types of services are available. There may be specific services that are available for victims of crime in your area. There are funding that's available through VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, that more and more legal services are participating in, and so that might be available in your community. There may be other attorneys that are specializing in this area. There may also be a senior hotline or a legal hotline that isn't just specifically for seniors but is more broad, that is an entry point for people into the civil legal system and can either provide advice and brief service right through the telephone in that way, or can also refer clients to additional legal help to give them fuller representation if telephone advice is not everything they need, if they need more than that. And so depending on where you are, there are just a range of different possibilities, and so getting to know who is the Title IIIB attorney for your area under the Older Americans Act, who is providing services to older adults, who is providing services to victims of crime, is there a private bar elder law section that has interest in this area, what are the range of resources that you could refer to? And establishing relationships within those are an important way to create successful referrals. I want to make sure that I tell you all about our NICLR website and the trainings that we have. Our trainings are provided in webinar form. They're provided electronically because we're serving the whole country. And our website is niclr.acl.gov because we're part of the Administration for Community Living. And on our website, you can learn about our upcoming trainings. We have 2 training tracks, and we do 2 trainings a month. One is our legal basics training, and that is designed for people who are perhaps newer attorneys, learning about issues of law that intersect with how they serve their older clients, and also designed for non-attorneys who want to learn about the legal rights of older adults and how they can spot issues that might be legal, how they can start addressing them, and sort of the basics that help them navigate those systems. We provide training in a wide array of subject matter areas, from elder abuse and exploitation, like the trainings that we're talking about now, to health and care and long-term services and supports, consumer law, housing, income security, a whole range of different areas, how to guardianship and its alternatives, advanced care planning, supported decision-making. There's a wide range of areas that we provide trainings in, all of which intersect, in my opinion, with the legal needs that victims of elder abuse may have. You can access all the materials from our past trainings, and that includes the webinar recordings and PowerPoints, but we also have a written document a written either issue brief or chapter summary, about 5 to 7 pages that goes with each of our trainings. So if you didn't make the training and you don't have an hour to look through it, you can flip through that and see what you need. You can also sign up for our email list. And lastly, we provide case consultations. We do individual consultations for professionals to talk with them about how they can best serve their older clients. And the email address for our case consultations is right there, consultnickler@acl.hhs.gov. So with that, I think I'm wrapped up, and we'll go back to our question and answer session.
All right, great, thank you. So I think we're going to open this up now to Q&A, and everyone who's listening in, if I know some of you have submitted questions in the chat pod. If you have any questions, please submit them now if you haven't already. And then Bill and Jennifer, I don't know if you want to go ahead and go through some of the questions we have received.
I can certainly answer, I think, the first two. The first question is, when is the national conference provided by NAPSA? This year it will be August 27th through the 31st in Anaheim, California. So that's August 27th through 31st in Anaheim, California. You can go to the NAPSA website to get information about that, and let me give that to you now. It's www.napsa-now.org, and you can get information about registration for the conference if you're interested. It is a marvelous conference. It is interdisciplinary in every facet. We have prosecutors, law enforcement, litigators, legal services, and certainly adult protective services, ombudsmen, and others. The second question, I think, for me is, I had mentioned the pilot training that we did in California for adult protective services. The question is, pilot training available in other districts, such as the Virgin Islands? If it is, how does a district go about setting that up? I wish I could say we were doing other trainings under that project, because I would sign up first to go to the Virgin Islands, but we aren't doing other trainings right now under that particular project. We hope to do that in the future, but I would suggest contacting NAPSA itself about how something like that might be arranged. And so if you're interested, I think NAPSA would be very willing to talk to you about that. So again, I think what I'll do is I'll give you the email address for my associate, Kendra Keene, if I can. Kendra's listening in, and her email address is Kendra, Kendra, Keene, Kuehn. Again, I'll do that again. Kendra, Kendra.Kuehn at napsa-now.org. If you connect with us, I think we can help you at least to figure out how that might be a possibility.
And it looks like some of the other questions I might be able to answer. So, and I encourage people to keep asking questions, because I'm really interested in hearing what you all are seeing and doing. We had a question about the types of training that NICLR offers and coordinating with NICLR for a training in your area. And as I said, most of the trainings that we offer are online, but we also work with communities that are trying to put on trainings to share materials and to help them with developing those trainings as part of our work in legal services development. And in particular, we work with legal assistance developers in each of the states who are thinking about how is the legal services system working for older adults in their state and what types of training might be available. So I would encourage you to get in touch with us at our consultnickler@acl.hhs.gov address if you're interested in thinking about how could you put on some training for your area that might then help with the legal services delivery and the referral system for that legal services work in your community. I'll go ahead and keep going on the next question too. And then Bill, maybe you can chime in as well, because I think this is something we probably both have dealt with. The next question is, if we are referring to an elder abuse, if we are referring an elder abuse victim of financial exploitation to legal services, the first response I get is that they have no money to pay for an attorney. What do you suggest we say to them to make it less intimidating in that way? And so I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is that if they are particularly low income, or if all of their money has been taken as a result of the financial exploitation, they may qualify for free services. All of the services I discussed through legal aid are usually provided free of charge through the other sources of funding that I mentioned. That said, there may be situations in which private attorneys are willing to provide services on what's called a sliding scale basis, so that they do it in part based on income. Sometimes if it's a question of what's called a tort case, a case for some sort of wrongful action, the attorney is willing to wait and see if any money is gotten and take their fees out of the money that is recovered. And so then the person is not paying anything up front. Those are a couple of different ways that they may be able to deal with the idea that generally people are a little afraid to contact a lawyer because they're concerned about what the cost of that will be. Bill, do you want to add in on that?
No, Jennifer, I think you did a great job in responding to that. I just would urge folks when they're working with their clients to help them understand that they should inquire further, that the fact that they're worried that it's going to cost them money may be an artificial barrier in many cases, or not as much as they want. So I tend to think that it's the obligation of those working with their clients to help people understand what the array of possibilities are, and how potentially useful it may be to go the civil law route, and that their barriers may not be as great as they think they are. So thanks for that. And that's part of why I think training and education of APS workers, ombudsmen, and many others is so necessary, so that they understand exactly what Jennifer just described.
And this is also, I think, where I would get back to the establishing relationships. The more that you know about what's available in your community, including what the private bar is willing to offer, and whether there is an elder law section of the bar association perhaps, or whether there's sometimes there are programs that will offer particular help at a reduced rate for older clients. Understanding what the availability is in your area really makes a big difference in being able to tell people what the options are. Looking ahead at questions, we have a question about small claims court. Bill, you had mentioned small claims court in your
I did, yes.
presentation. Do you want to?
Yes, let me, I don't know that I can answer the specific question about how they can enforce a judgment against the defendant once it's been made, but I think I was especially impressed, and I had never thought particularly of small claims court as a vehicle for getting restitution or redressing financial loss. And we had, as one of our presenters, Kelly Morgantini, who is not only runs a senior law project, but she's also a small claims judge in her community, and she described numerous cases where there were awards made by the small claims court that were in fact paid, and particularly in a small community, in which she described ways in which as a small claims judge, and that they're able to ensure that the payment is made. I was very impressed with that, and I know that small claims court amounts that fall within their jurisdiction vary from state to state. I'm sure of that. California's is surprisingly generous, and it's a really untapped resource when we're not talking about great sums of money, and it's clearly an available, accessible form of pursuit of justice, if you will, for a lot of people that, let's face it, $1,000 lost may not sound like a lot of money, and you're not going to get a trial attorney to deal with that in most cases, or others, but that $1,000 may be absolutely incredibly essential to the livelihood of the older person. And small claims court is a very real alternative. And so what I would urge anybody interested in at least knowing in your jurisdiction how that works is to look into the small claims court requirements and how it works in your community. I was very impressed with what I heard.
We have another question that sort of follows up on our discussion about what if there's no legal aid in my area. And one thing I would say about that is that while a legal aid office may not be located in your particular county, there may be a legal aid, a more regional office that does cover your county, and you may not be aware that they also provide services in that county. When I worked in Maryland, I found that sometimes people were very aware of the legal aid office when it was physically located in their county, but when it was one or two counties over, they were less familiar with it, and it was harder to get clients from those areas. And so looking to see if there are regional options, or as I said before, some type of statewide hotline that could be available as one option. But I also wanted to mention the possibility of attorneys who are willing to do pro bono work. And it's been my experience that especially in smaller communities, more rural communities, areas where there's a smaller number of attorneys in the bar, that there's actually a tremendous willingness to do pro bono work. And pro bono means work on a volunteer basis without being paid. And so that's something that is another area to explore, because I found that often when there's a small community of attorneys, there's a lot of community mindedness that goes into that. And these are cases, these elder financial exploitation cases, that are extremely compelling and are really something that someone may feel the need to take on.
Jennifer, if I can just add a little bit to that great answer of yours. Under the Older Americans Act, the area agencies on aging are required to provide funding for and support for legal aid or legal services for older adults. And so in theory, there is a legal services program for older adults in virtually every community in America. It may not be in your particular offices, may not be in your community. A lot of area agencies on aging cover a lot of geography, many counties, many cities, but there is a legal services program for that jurisdiction of some kind or another available no matter what. Now, of course, many are, in fact, virtually all are thinly stretched and under-resourced, but there is one somewhere to at least connect with.
Thank you, Bill, and absolutely. Under, as I was mentioning before, the Older Americans Act, the Administration for Community Living is involved with making sure that there are, exactly what you said, legal assistance that's provided to older adults through the area agencies on aging, and those providers are available across the country.
There's a really good question up asking, does NAPSA or NICLR use any analytic tools to help find financial exploitation cases or fraud that affect particularly the elderly community, and may point out trends in the community? I'll speak for NAPSA. I don't think we're not using any analytical tools to do that. We're hoping that the NAMER system will give us a much greater understanding of financial exploitation along with all other cases over time. But I think the notion of using analytics within caseloads of APS programs is an excellent thought, and should be able to provide a real sense of trends. Case reports showing what kinds of forms of fraud and exploitation and other things going on. The caseload data that we've never had before or in any real meaningful way, we think is going to be really remarkably rich for learning a lot down the road, but it's in its early stages.
And to add to that, NICLR does not, we work with professionals, not directly with the older adults. So we're not keeping track of cases in that way, but we do track the interest that we have in particular issues through the case consultations that come to us, and that can include what types of, say, scams are being discussed or other forms of financial exploitation. And we also get input on the work that we do throughout the year, and that helps us to spot trends. I wanted to mention also that I saw in the chat box that someone mentioned clinics through law schools, which is another wonderful resource and another way that people can access civil legal assistance in your community, and they can also be a great resource to connect you with other types of services, other lawyers as well. So encourage you to look for that in your community as well. I see we have a question about, does a civil attorney help elders who want to get a person out of their home who's living with them and is the elder does not want to have there, it doesn't want them using their property? Mm-hmm. And yes is the short answer. But one of the things that a civil legal attorney can do is help someone with an eviction proceeding, or sometimes it's called an ejectment proceeding, depending on what the court is and what the needs are and the relationship between the people. But yes, if there's someone who is living with the elder and they don't want them there anymore, civil legal assistance can play a critical role in that. We're scrolling through questions now, so give us just a sec. I see we have a question about sharing of data. Oh my goodness. Sharing of data is a complicated issue because there's certainly information that different people are tracking through different electronic systems, and not all of those systems talk to each other. I think that NAMERS, which Bill mentioned earlier, the new voluntary way to get data collections for the regarding adult maltreatment will be a tremendous source of information. And there's also going to be new data that's going to be collected regarding the services that are provided through Administration for Community Living funding, and they're going to have different data collection that will hopefully allow us to see trends over time in that way as well, and that's something that is upcoming. Bill, anything to add there on some of the other questions?
No, I don't think so, Jennifer. But I'm happy to take a bit of a start on this next question. Does
Great.
NICLR and NAPSA have any programs, services, or trainings that also deals with veterans who are often susceptible to elder abuse? You're very right about that. I would what I wanted to mention first, NAPSA doesn't have any particular programs related to that, although it's a really terrific thought. But I would recommend contacting California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform, or CANR. And the reason I mention them is they have done a great deal of work with respect to abuses within the VA's aid and attendance program. It's a remarkable program that provides cash assistance to veterans when they don't have enough money to be able to meet their home and community-based care service needs is a cash program, terrific program, but there are some really awful people out there who figured out how to scam that system. And one of the common approaches is to get the veteran to sign up for the aid and attendance program, and then when they get the cash payment, to use that cash payment to purchase an annuity, which is not what it was intended for, because it becomes all of a sudden a new source of money for an annuity. And so Canner, I think, even has publications on this. So I do recommend folks contact California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. And before we get off, I'll come up with their phone number or their website.
And yes, NICLA does have some trainings that relate to veterans as well. And we have, I believe, later this year, we have an upcoming training that relates to veteran issues. And so I will be sure to share that information. I just have to look for the date. And I can, all right, we have a question here about guardianship. And I think that the question is, what are the different options for guardianship? And the question is about petitioning for guardianship, but I would also say that there's also issues of how do you defend against the guardianship. And I would actually suggest that people take a step back, and I think there's been greater effort towards alternatives to guardianship recently that isn't necessarily being appreciated. And so guardianship is really designed to be the last resort. And so there are a number of different avenues that you can pursue that may allow you to address the need of the older adult without necessarily having to take away all of their rights, which is what happens in a guardianship. And so NICLA has a number of resources that address this issue, including a great training on guardianship and its alternatives. And so I would urge you to take a look at that if that's an issue that's in your community. And that guardianship and its alternatives overview is actually coming up in July. So that's July 10th. There's my plug for that training, and my plug for our veterans training. That one is coming up in October, on October 9th. And those are both part of our Legal Basics series. I see we're coming up to the end of our time. I wanted to mention that there's also a veterans program available through ACL, and that's something that I would urge people to take a look at through the Administration for Community Living. They have tremendous programs for veterans as well. And as we're about to conclude, I just want to thank everyone so much for their participation, and particularly thank you to the DOJ Elder Justice Initiative for putting this on. This has been a tremendous opportunity to talk with everyone, and we at NICLA appreciate it.
Yeah, and we at the Elder Justice Initiative really appreciate you and Bill taking the time to put this presentation together and speak to everyone today. Everyone, I hope you guys all got some benefit out of this webinar. I know I definitely did. If there are any questions that you have that didn't get answered or that you think of, as soon as this thing is over, please feel free to reach out to the Elder Justice Initiative email address, which is on the screen now, elder.justice@usdoj.gov, and we can try to answer your questions for you. And again, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the OVC TTAC training website for those of you who want to re-listen to it or, share it with colleagues that may not have been able to attend today. Thank you everyone again for listening, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Concludes the webinar.